Good evening, everyone. I just want to hold the book out, Unveiling Jazbaa, which is a brilliant title and it's a brilliant, brilliant cover. And I would request all of you to buy it. The text is fantastic, but the cover is just really sensational. So, no, I'm just joking. The book is fabulous. Um, see? So, Ayush, tell us about the cover.
Oh, this wasn't my decision. I wanted something else, but the publisher, both in UK as well as in India, stuck to this. So if anyone likes this, credit to Kartika there. I think Kartika is there. Yeah, yeah. And Peter in UK. Yeah.
Because so Unveiling Jazbaa it's an unexpected title that turned up suddenly, and we said, where has this come from? What is this about? We've all heard about the stories. We read about it. We are excited about the Indian women's cricket team, and this is the story of our neighbors and their life experiences, which are very different and very in a way startling compared to even what I think Indian sports fans, cricket fans would be familiar with. This is the second time I'm having a chat with Ayush about this book. And the first time I'd forgotten to ask him, but why did you start this? Where did it come from?
So the idea to start with this book was because I was in a position once where I had to interview the Pakistani women cricketers. And at that point, when you're interviewing international cricketers, you can't just turn up and start asking, who are you, where are you from? But there was absolutely nothing I found as far as literature on Pakistan women's cricket is concerned. Am I audible? Is this mic working? Okay, perfect. Uh,
He said, hold it closer.
okay, closer? Yeah. So that was the reason. And the thing was, when I went and interviewed them, yes, it started out with the idea of, okay, who are you, where are you from? And then I realized quite early that to explain what was happening on the field for them, I couldn't have done it without explaining what was going on outside the field. Because there's so many factors, socio-economic, political, cultural factors that were acting up on their day-to-day lives that made cricket, a sport that is so popular in Pakistan, almost inaccessible to half their population. So that is where I was sort of drawn to the story. Also because, I mean, right now, if we are mostly writing and reading about men's cricket, it has run out of stories. We are just digging and digging and digging and trying to find something to, some new information to make a story on. But honestly, with women's cricket, there's an open playground for stories, for news, for just basic analysis of their cricket. So that is where, of course, there are a couple of books written on Indian women's cricket. So that was out of bounds. So this is a story that drew me. Yeah.
And it's almost, Ayush, a COVID story, right? You did this, you conducted this in quite an unusual manner. It took you time to get through. So Ayush has spoken a lot about this in the past, but we have to get him to tell you all the fun parts of what it's like. I mean, this is the best lit fest in the city, so you'd better give them your best.
Uh, so the thing was, okay, this entire thing was done over Zoom calls. Now, there is absolutely no replacement for, being on the ground and, making your eyes more powerful than your ears. But there were advantages for doing this over Zoom calls as well, especially when it came to interviewing the players. Because till then, all the women cricketers or coaches I had interviewed, invariably what would happen, I mean, I'm mostly used to covering or talking to men cricketers, and the best place to talk to them is in the hotel rooms where they really open up to you. And understandably, that's not an option with women cricketers. So you would invariably have somebody with them from most countries, not just about Indians, but even other countries except West Indies maybe. I didn't see that in West Indies. But either there would be people with them, or the doors would be open, so people are constantly walking in and out. So in that case, what's happening is that there is no privacy and there's no openness to it. With Zoom calls, what I realized that they could be frank, and that gave me as an interviewer the privacy that I needed with them. At the same time, I sort of realized that they are also getting more comfortable because a lot of things are said and expressed through their faces. It's not really verbally what they're saying. Because, for example, I mean, Shoaib Akhtar, for example, nobody has said an ill word about him. but I know exactly how many cricketers like him and don't like him because they're expressing all of this, which they probably wouldn't do in a crowded setting. So that was an advantage purely from the perspective of interviews. But yes, I mean, that's how I got going with it.
The most unusual part about the story of Pakistan women's cricket is about access, right? So you would imagine that there are obstacles. There are definitely obstacles for access to women's sport in India. In many ways, you are having people, there's societal pressures. There are all the other burdens that our athletes carry. The Pakistan experience is almost that you will find in this book is almost, I think, magnified in a way because it is literally sometimes a matter of life and death and secrecy. So were you surprised when you came across that? When did you first come across it? Because the book starts with a chapter about one such story.
Yeah, because it was the first time, because the first time I spoke to them, I spoke to 5 of the cricketers at the same time. And there I realized that each of them, they're coming from different parts of Pakistan, but all of them have to go through the same struggle of having to play the game in secrecy from their own family members. Now, this is not something you'd find in India, at least not something I've come across, at least with the international cricketers, those who end up playing for India, that they've not had to hide from their families. It's the same routine story that my father liked cricket, or they wanted me to become a cricketer, or I started playing with my brothers. But with Pakistan, it's almost like every second person has played this game secretly from their own family members, whether it's their fathers, their brothers, their mothers, whoever. So, and they've had to sort of pretend, cut their hair, pretend to be boys while they're traveling. There's a story of Sabah Nazir. She used to travel, she had got a boycott done just so that she could travel in a public bus. And she had 5 rupees to spend.
On the roof?
Yeah, on the roof, because she had 5 rupees to spend, so she couldn't have wasted that on the bus ticket. She would buy like a naan worth 5 rupees and dip it in water and eat it. And that is how she survived and trained to become a cricketer. And eventually she made her debut at the age of 28. It's not something you find in India. Even in Chambal, for that matter, I've gone to Chambal, there is training facility available by BCCI for those women to come and train, which is not, here, even say, recently I was talking to Diana Beck. She had to travel all the way from Gilgit-Baltistan to Lahore just to be able to play cricket.
And the story of Pakistan's women's cricket itself is, it's a story that is dominated by class. It starts with class, and has that, if you can just explain that to the audience, and whether that class barrier has actually broken or it's changing, or what do you think about where it is at this point in time? You're talking about stories of Diana.
Yeah, I think that's with most of the cases, in most places where cricket started, it was the rich and the wealthy who would start and sponsor these, because Shaiza and Sharmeen, 2 sisters from Pakistan, from Karachi, they sort of sponsored the initial tours to, literally for 7 years, they sponsored from their own family business, and each trip would cost somewhere around 20 lakh Pakistani rupees. Now this is like 25 years back I'm talking about. They would take care of everyone's expenses, their clothing, but cricket was accessible to very few people. This again goes back to the Zia-ul-Haq regime which was there in the 1980s, which sort of kept, if for those who don't know, women were not allowed to perform publicly, whether it was in dancing, in music, in theatre, or even to play. So it had, even though he passed away in, I think, 1988, it had its residual after effects for many years. I think till now there are some residual after effects of that. So women were not allowed to go out and play. So the moment sport becomes a barrier, but yet even during Zia-ul-Haq's reign, there was a specific class of rich, wealthy people from extremely elitist backgrounds who could do everything that they wanted. Alcohol was banned, they could drink alcohol. So a lot of these things, they could get away by doing all of this. And that is why cricket became accessible to that specific class of women. And slowly and steadily, once PCB came, they took over the running of cricket. All the infrastructure around the country was made available to the players. You could see now there are players from Abbottabad, there are players from Balochistan, Chaman near Afghanistan border. There are players from Gilgit-Baltistan. They're from all over, yet, there is dominance of Karachi and Lahore as the 2 metropolitan cities, but there are cricketers now. All your best cricketers are coming from these rural tier 2 towns, tier 2, tier 3 cities. Yeah.
And these are similar, one of the things that you look at are similar patterns in India and Pakistan. When women's cricket became part of when the ICC said that the national board should run men's and women's cricket, in India it was seen, I don't think the male boards were happy to do it. They were sort of a bit grumbly, and they said, "Oh, these women are always fighting with each other," and all the other and the rest of it. And then, whereas Australia, New Zealand, West Indies, they sort of stepped up their game, and they went through. And there's a great portion in the book where he talks about the story of Ramiz Raja, who currently is the CEO, who came up and said, look, we are going to have the Pakistan Women IPL, which is the first time it was announced, and therefore the Indian Cricket Board said, okay, we are going to have ours before you. Tell them the Ramiz Raja story about...
Okay, so in 2004, PCB didn't run women's cricket, but they were running men's cricket, and with that, they had a lot of clout. Now the thing is, till date, the record for the highest runs scored in a test innings and the record for most test wickets taken in a match are both held by Pakistanis, Kiran Baloch and Shaiza Khan, and both were registered in 2004 in Karachi. That test match would have nearly not happened because Ramiz Raja wrote to the West Indies Cricket Board asking them not to send their team to play in Pakistan. But yet they went ahead, they came, they played, they registered records, and that record still stands.
And the reason was a faction fight, or the reason was because the men...
it was a factional rivalry because there were like 3 factions trying to take control of the women's game, and Ramiz Raja clearly had his ideas of who he wants to support, and so it was a factional rivalry. It was nothing to do with men and women, but yes, he did try to stop them. I don't know how did that benefit him in any way or benefit any factions for that matter in any way.
I think you just have to say that sort of people mature and they grow up and they change, and so Aayush had a conversation, this book has been published, written by an Indian writer about Pakistani women's cricket. Is it accessible to the women in Pakistan yet? What has been the response? I know, tell them about your YouTube conversation that you went a bit rogue on it.
So, I mean, it's available, but so far they still have to sort of import the books from UK, and they're happy. I mean, it's quite interesting because many of them don't read, so they don't know, they're not interested in reading, they don't read, and to top it, it's in English, so it's difficult for a lot of them to read. But every time there's an interview in Pakistan where we are talking about PCB, they just get a little happy, come and just like one tweet on the book. So I think that's my sign that they like this. Also, I think it gives me a lot of pleasure because a lot of women who are not even journalists from Pakistan, they're able to exactly pinpoint the areas of discussion, and the fact that I get validation from them is, I don't know, the biggest takeaway from this book to know, because there was a lot of insecurity while writing this book. And till then I was just relying on, say, Karunya to, is this fine, is the tone fine, is the language fine? But when it comes from them and they are validating that each of these struggles is true, because I was looking for a co-writer. I couldn't have done it as an Indian man writing on Pakistani women. I was looking for a co-writer. I never got them. Because invariably anyone who was interested in the subject had some or the other allegiance, and there was some conflict of interest, and thankfully they said it up front. And so right now this can completely become an outsider's perspective to the Pakistani story.
When you've covered women's cricket with some detail, with some sort of sustained involvement. So, are there any parallels that are there? Because does Indian women's cricket look in a better place, or is it just a question of what it looks like on the surface, and is it all about money?
Way ahead. Like in terms, because when men's cricket was developed by the BCCI, the same facilities are available, and as I was just saying, you have access even in Chambal, even the remotest part of the country. I don't know about the northeast, what the development there is. So at least there is access to cricket. There is acceptance a lot more, I would say. I'm not saying that those struggles do not exist in India, But at the same time, the money. I mean, a Pakistani player, just by playing throughout the year, will not end up earning as much as an Indian cricketer will get by playing one test match. I mean, those players earn less than me, and I'm a journalist. That doesn't speak well, because that is for the best cricketers. So, uh, poor pay, there is lack of access, there is lack of acceptance, and I mean, they have a brilliant media team which sort of makes everything seem great because they're traveling by business class, staying in five-star hotels. But underneath, there are a lot of issues, and there's a vast difference between India and Pakistan.
I could argue with him about this for a long time, but I won't. But yeah, what he's saying about money is the most visible and the most palpable thing. There is a certain sense of I think a catch up that is that it's almost like India is trying to do catch up, because the Pakistan cricket had a maternity policy. They said if anyone's having a child, the mother can take leave, the father can take leave, their contracts will still hold, which has not yet come into play in the Indian structure, in the Indian system. What next for you with regards to Pakistan cricket or Pakistan women's cricket? What is your any more books, or you're just sort of soaking in the
Research. There are some research stuff that has been assigned to me, so I'll be working on that. Around barriers of entry and exit with some people this time, thankfully, with some people in Pakistan, some foot soldiers around there. So yeah.
Is it work? Is the book received well by the authorities in that sense? What has been the response?
They've
Because
been blank.
this is the common thing, right? Now there have been 2 books written on Indian women's cricket. There's been a study done on what the problems are in Indian women's cricket. It's called the Equal Hue Report. It's a very in-depth, very detailed study, but it's literally like there has been no response, as far as I know, from the BCCI to say that, okay, this has happened, this is what the problem is, this is how we do it. It just comes in acts of largesse. Okay, we are going to have an under-16 tournament. Okay, we are going to pay you money. We are going to pay equal match fees. So that is the thing that's there.
Yeah.
Is it sometimes a thing you think of to do the politically correct thing and then to let the media and the media hype and everything take care of it? Is that how women's cricket is run in our part of the world, regardless of how much money the boards have?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about just the boards, because I am aware that even the Equal You report, BCCI may not say anything upfront, but they're studying it. They're criticizing it or whatever, accepting it, but they're studying it. I am aware of that. So
Has anyone said anything to you?
only when they find certain things that they do not agree with. So yeah. So sorry, I've missed your question.
I said, is it just? I was saying, is it just a surface sort of? Is it to do the right thing media-wise? The image,
Yeah.
the image has to be sort of clean and perfect, and the rest of it.
Yeah, it is a PR drive. Yeah, it is a PR drive. I think right from the start has it changed, because one thing that always bothers me is how was there more coverage for women's cricket both in India and in Pakistan before the respective boards took over, BCCI and PCB. How was there more media coverage? How was there more crowds coming into the stadiums? And crowds by like 10,000, 20,000. So a huge number. How did that change all of a sudden when these boards took over? If anything, that should have increased. So clearly, I mean, okay, there is a development, and India has to be seen as the front runners in this, but Australia is somewhere else already. So they have to do the catch up. So they are left with no option. Even now, I mean, even in Pakistan, when cricket boards were not willing to come to the country, travel to the country, the men's team, they were playing women's games, because that was a nice soft front to put to the Western world that, listen, we are promoting the women's game. So, I mean, it is...
So the story of women's sport in both the countries, in India and in Pakistan, are very different. In Pakistan, the situation is almost like it would be in India maybe 75 years ago, if I took... Or is that too much? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what a closest comparison would be. But it's almost like when you read the stories of this denying access, denying entry, it's connected to many other things regarding government policy, government acceptance, the Zia regime and its fallout and the aftermath that still exists. We've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions that anyone has? We'd be happy to answer, or we could keep.
Hi, Sharda. Earlier you said that the women's sport actually got more recognition before the PCB and the BCCI took over, right? Like, why do you think that is? I mean, they had more to gain from popularizing and marketing the women's sport, right? But like, why did the recognition for it actually drop once like the official boards took over?
I don't know about India what the reason was, but with Pakistan it was kind of clear that Shaiza and Sharmeen, they were putting their money, they were putting all the effort. They ensured that the media came. They ensured that the games were popularized, that it was shown to people. Girls were brought in because back then, remember, Pakistan doesn't have a structure wherein, you can play in schools or colleges. So these open trials are held. So they tried to advertise what they were doing so that more and more girls come and try to give those trials and make it to the Pakistan side. So that was quite clear from Pakistan side. And after that, for PCB, this was just something that was forced on them by the ICC. So there was no incentive to really push the game forward because they were not making money out of it. And I mean, they were quite blatant that this is not our cricket, so to say.
The situation in India in the 1970s and the 80s, you had the presence of women's cricket in the newspapers, you recognized them because women were running their own game, they were running it in their own way, generating their own funds. And you'll hear all the crazy stories in the books written about the Indian women's team. Why didn't it happen to India? I mean, it's male chauvinism. Why are we going to run who's going to bother about the women's team? Our men are making stacks of cash. We don't. The Indian women used to get the same T-shirts, the throwaway T-shirts from the sponsors that the men had got. It was like, okay, they didn't even get shirts made to size at one point. So there was a period between 2006 and 2014-ish when the contracts came, that it's like the black hole. And India had qualified for a World Cup despite everything. They played a test match after how many years and won in England? 16 years or 6 years or 9 years, a bizarre number. And they won a test match in England. They were that talented. Mithali Raj and Jhulan Goswami are products of that era. The president of the BCCI told Diana Adelji and the secretary of the Railway Sports Control Board that if I had my way, women would not play cricket. So that's why. On record. It's published. You can find it on the internet.
But I think that's still the case, and it's not just with the boards. I'll tell you, I don't know, I don't mean to be a generationalist, so to say, but I think with a lot of older journalists also, it becomes a issue when we are talking about them playing the sport, and it is sort of demeaning.
I'll tell you, in my office not so long ago, I had this conversation about women's cricket.
Yeah.
And you're listening to it, and these are respectable senior people who are saying these things, know. So it is what I said.
And quite honestly, I would be much more comfortable talking to, say, an administrator of my generation. It's much easier to explain to them what you're doing than to older journalists. Sorry, I mean...
No, honestly, I mean, I'm not surprised at all. It's like,
I don't mean you, but yeah.
Thanks very much, Aayush. Thank you, everyone, for superb questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so